I'm now joined by Douglas Murray, and we're going to be talking about freedom and whether British people actually want it. Douglas, you, in your brilliant column this week, you talk about how there was an expectation that the 2020s were going to be the roaring 20s. And in fact, what you say is that they're going to become the boring 2020s. What do you mean by that?
Yes, this refers to something I actually referred to in a column earlier this year as well. Nick Christakis, a distinguished American academic, made headlines in a way that American academics tend not to across the UK earlier this year, when he said in passing that perhaps the 2020s would be like the 1920s, a great roaring decade. And that just as the 1920s were this great roaring decade following the Great War, so perhaps after the Corona era, we would have this great roaring party decade of the 2020s. Of course, there's a reason why the media and everyone else wanted to pick up on that. It's a sort of terrific story. It's a great claim. And it's, for a lot of people at any rate, something to look forward to. I pointed out, by the way, when I last mentioned this story, that there's an obvious problem with it, which is that for most people, the 1920s weren't all that roaring. For a relatively small segment of society, they were. But for most people, they just had to get on with their jobs, with their lives. They weren't all at cocktail parties with the bright young things. And, of course, the whole decade ended in a crash. So I wasn't at all sure that I wanted the 2020s to be roaring like that. And if it was going to be one great big orgy, then I suspect, as always, that the benefits would accrue to a relatively small number of people, and most people wouldn't get a look in. However, yes, I've just expanded on this in my column this week, really to make a bit of a wider point, which is that there has been a feeling, I think, through the pandemic that once we sort of got through it, we were really going to live again. You know, people were really just going to want to get out there. They were going to want to do all of the things they hadn't been allowed to do. The horrible 18 months we've had, perhaps longer, would be forgotten and made up for. And actually, as I say in my column, I think the signs are rather in the opposite direction. All the polls show a very significant chunk of the British public who don't even want to mew, let alone roar, quite happy staying home in the garden for the rest of their lives, want that even if all the restrictions are lifted and even if all of the measurements to meet those restrictions are met. And then you've got the other cultural issues, the other wider issues, which particularly I mentioned in the column, is this very strange early warning sign we already have of the extraordinary opprobrium that's being shown to anyone who is sort of wanting to get back out there. There's a deep sniffiness in the air, particularly in Britain, a sort of sniffiness of the people wanting to get back out there, particularly, and I think this is one of the most unsettling things, the deep sniffiness about young people wanting to get back out there. And I think this in particular is quite wrong and must be resisted.
Is it something that's getting worse? Because, I mean, I think there's always been a sort of undercurrent of suspicion of fun in Britain. We sort of came from Puritanism after all. And I suppose from what I got from your piece is that perhaps what's happened is we're reverting to what we were before, which is a nation of people who don't really trust people being outdoors and enjoying themselves. We're suspicious of public pleasure.
Yes, that's right. I always think of that great H.L. Mencken quote about Puritanism. You know, he defined Puritanism famously as the sneaking fear that someone somewhere was having fun. There's a great streak of this in Britain, always has been. And I think it's been exacerbated in the last year because although we may not have the Puritan religion, we have the version of it that replaces God with the NHS, for instance. You know, that you are risking the NHS by having fun. You are failing to do your bit to protect the great national institution and the great national deity, that you're being selfish by enjoying yourself and going out. And as I say, that in particular, this is likely to push a generational divide that's already there. Like generational divides already exist, but a generational divide that's particularly there in the case of this virus, because what young people, I'm in my 40s now, so I don't think I count as that anymore, but what young people in their late teens and 20s have had to give up in the last 18 months is very significant. They have been, as I say in the piece, they have been forced to, for instance, if they're students, study alone. Many of them have lived alone. They've missed the opportunity to meet their peers. They've been told, unless they're in a stable relationship, to be not just monogamous, but actually to be chaste. The government has told them to be virgins, or to at least engage in 2 years of chastity. They have, if they've followed the rules, they've done that. I'm not sure how many have, incidentally, but if they follow the rules, they've done that. This is a generation that has missed a significant amount of its lives and its opportunities to meet friends, to meet partners. They've studied alone, they've run up student debts alone, they've graduated alone, and I don't at all blame them that they now want to get out there for a virus that, as can't be said often enough, has almost no effect, has almost a negligible effect on people of their age group. So this great demand has been made of them, and I think this lingering sense that they should, as it were, keep staying at home, even though we have had the vaccine now, the vaccine that by any standard should be the passport out of this terrible, ghastly era. Even after that, there's this sniffiness that they would want to go out to these large-scale events. And I think it's cruel, I think it's unusually cruel, and I think that all the sort of adults engaging in that sniffiness should really think about that.
I suppose it's crueler than Puritanism in many ways, or any kind of theocratic thinking, because they're not saying to people, you don't sort of indulge your vices because it's bad for you. They're saying don't do it because you might harm someone else.
Yes, that's right. You might harm the NHS, you'll put the NHS under strain, and you'll kill other people. As I say, I mean, we get back to this thing, either the vaccine is the way out or it isn't. And if it's the way out, then life has got to return to normal. And I do, from my own observation, keep noticing that it's Britain that seems to be worst in recognising this. You know, the Americans do seem to realise, I've made this comparison in a number of places, the Americans do seem to realise, once the vaccine's in, you make your choice about whether you take it or not, but then you just get back out there. And the British don't seem to have taken that view. Partly because the government very, very misguidedly suggested earlier this year that the vaccine wasn't why cases had fallen and that actually it was lockdown. But if the vaccine isn't the way out, then there is no way out of this. And I think that's something that the British in particular have got to focus on. But yes, you're right, there is this sort of, as we see in the public health campaigns of recent weeks and months, where people are, being shown scary images of people dying and basically being told this would be something you'd caused if you were to flout the rules, is a form of coercion which is not just ugly but untrue.
Well, perhaps the martyr of your piece, if I could use that word, is Charlie Perry, the football fan who stuck a red flare up his bottom and lit it, and it was a sort of viral sensation. The video of it was a viral sensation, and he received enormous amounts of opprobrium and sort of disgust, really, and that very much speaks to what you're saying, that we are appalled at the idea that someone would go out and behave irresponsibly in a way that British people might have been in the 50s.
Yes, I mean, I should stress Charlie Berry is a slightly unusual hero, but nevertheless, it's important to get this right. Yes, as you say, Mr. Perry is a 25-year-old roofer who was very excited, I think we can say that, about the England final in the Euros playing against Italy. And Mr. Perry came to some national notoriety in Britain. We should stress this for our international viewers. Mr. Perry came to some notoriety, indeed made the front page of a number of newspapers, because on the relevant match day, he went large, as you might say. He drank, he thinks, about 20 cans of cider, which is quite a lot. And he also managed to get into the ground for free by jigging his way in, apparently they call it. And so he was absolutely thrilled by the whole day. Couldn't have been happier. And expressed this happiness in some ways a traditional way. By taking his trousers down in Leicester Square, taking his trousers down, shoving a flare up his backside and lighting it. And it may not be how you or I would celebrate England reaching the finals of the Euros, but for Mr. Perry it seemed to be the mot juste, just the ticket. And he actually said this. The press, after vilifying him, they caught up with him, and he said in an interview, he's just thought that after 18 months, really miserable months, he thought that people needed a bit of cheering up. So it was a sort of public service in a way in Mr. Perry's mind. He certainly saw it that way. And of course it is a dangerous thing to do, and we should stress, in case there are any children watching, that this is not advisable. Mr. Perry didn't actually feel, fortunately, the sparks from the flare in his anus, because he drunk 20 cans of cider. And if you're going to avoid, it turns out, the back flare of a flare, 20 cans of cider is your necessary precursor.
Yeah. But there are better ways of letting off steam, is what we want to.
Yes, and sparks. And so Mr. Perry did this, and what was interesting about it was that this is to my mind, I mean, as I say, you and I may not favour this sort of form of celebration, but this is pretty much what I expect of England football fans. It's the sort of thing they do. And the crowd in Leicester Square was absolutely thrilled. It went down very well among his friends and his newly acquired friends. It was just the nation as a whole that reacted with this universal opprobrium to it, which I just thought was rather interesting, because I don't think he should be a national hero, but nor should he be regarded as a sort of national villain. And there was this complete, across the media, there was this thing of what a terrible thing to do, what an awful example to set, what does this tell us about our nation, what sort of image does this send out? And I just say that this reaction is an example of something which we've seen as well in the reaction to young people going out to nightclubs since Monday. This general sort of sense that I don't like these things and therefore these things are wrong. And my own view is that, within the limits of the law, if you don't like things, don't do them. And don't be around people who do them. I mean, don't go to Leicester Square on a match day when you know it's going to be full of lagered up football louts trying to set light to their backsides. So just sort of one of the principles of a tolerant society is that you let people do things that you wouldn't yourself do, so long as they're within the law.